Hello everyone and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I am your host, Nicolo Grasso, and today I'm joined by two lovely guests, but also two lovely friends from different corners of the podcasting world, of the internet, and of David Cronenberg fandom. On one side, we have Orrin, formerly of the Jump Crouch podcast, and probably the number one David Cronenberg fan that I know. How are you doing, Orrin?
How's it going? It's good. I always love talking about David Cronenberg. I have a very irrational love of his work and his persona, but I try to temper it, but sometimes it's hard to do, but I'm happy to be here.
You're drawn to this world. You're drawn to this world, and I'm happy to welcome you in for this conversation. And today we're not alone because, of course, we talk about Cronenberg. I needed to have my favorite Canadian on this podcast to represent Randy Burrows from Uncut. How are you, Randy? Thank you so much for being here.
Nico, thanks for having me, man. I'm really excited about this. Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see Orrin again. And I'm really looking forward to talking about Cronenberg because Orrin, you're not alone, man. I love this guy. Sort of when I was becoming a film fan, I was, he was one of those guys. He was like one of those Lynch characters, right? Like a guy going off doing his own thing in his own corner of cinema, and he'd have these things pop up, and it was just instantly on your radar. So very excited to talk about, his film, and very excited actually to talk about sort of the kernel of the ideas of his film, the graphic novel too. So yeah, again, Nico, thanks for having me on, man. This is awesome.
I'm very, very happy to have you both on board. And as you listeners know, as you can imagine, today we're talking about the David Cronenberg film, A History of Violence, which, funnily enough, is usually put into, in a very cheeky way, I would say, into like the best comic book adaptations of all time, because it's actually based on a comic book, or rather a graphic novel, and that's what we're talking about today. John Wagner's A History of Violence and the David Cronenberg 2005 adaptation.
What the hell were you thinking?
I wasn't thinking.
Obviously not.
Bobby's been riding me all year, Dad. He's a jerk.
He's a jerk.
Yeah, he's a jerk.
That's no excuse. You stand up to him, you don't put him in the hospital.
Oh, big deal. It's the best thing anyone could have done to him. Besides, I only got suspended.
It is a big deal. His parents say they might sue us. We can't afford that, Jack. We don't have that kind of money.
Oh, what? Mom's not gonna take the case? Oh, whatever, Dad.
Listen, smart mouth. In this family, we do not solve our problems by hitting people.
No, in this family, we shoot them.
Jack.
This is the first time we are talking about a comic book on this podcast, both in its new iteration and in its previous one. So I'm actually curious, are you guys fans of comics? Because I feel like we're all three of us are adults now. It usually feels like, comic books are for children. It's like that type of mentality.
Sure.
But I think nowadays, it's 2025. We've all grown to accept graphic novels as their genuine form of art. So I'm curious if both of you still keep up with comics or graphic novels? Is it something you just read occasionally, or what about you, Orrin?
Yeah, this is the first graphic novel I've read in maybe like half a decade. It's been a moment. It's been a moment since I've read a graphic novel. I did have a phase when I was in college where I got really obsessed with Alan Moore. And I read like Watchmen, and I think I read like From Hell and V for Vendetta. But Watchmen was like my favorite. I was like, whoa, this is crazy reading this and like having all these ideas about America, American imperialism, whatever, all this stuff, deconstructing superheroes. And then I got really into Batman. So I read like The Long Halloween, Arkham Asylum, like all these Batman graphic novels. And then I pretty much hard stopped. Though I did read Mouse as well. Mouse is
nice.
A classic. But yeah, I would say I'm very much a casual. I don't really read graphic novels that much. I appreciate the art form, especially like what Alan Moore does. But yeah, I would say I'm very casual when it comes to graphic novels.
Yeah, actually, I'm sort of similar to Orrin. I grew up on comics. I was definitely a Marvel guy, and I was big into Marvel comics, when I was a kid. But this was before the cinematic rights were available. So in the '90s, I remember I was having conversations with buddies about what actor would be the coolest Spider-Man, and I always thought at the time like Bruce Campbell would be it, and
Oh,
I had my
nice.
I had my different
That's so
picks for this
funny.
stuff. But yeah, growing up, I was big on like within the Marvel realm, it was largely Alpha Flight, which was a Canadian band of superheroes, and they had a good 12 issue run to start things off, and it was by John Byrne, who wrote and illustrated, and he's just sort of an iconic guy, and I think he did a lot of like he did Avengers later on, and I think Hulk, and like he went to a number of different titles, but John Byrne, and he actually studied not too far from where I live in Halifax. So he was a guy whose career I followed a little bit. But then when I got to university, it was sort of, yeah, just sort of a full switch. Definitely became the film guy by the time I got to university, and I didn't really check in with the comic land too much. So I haven't read much for graphic novels over the last several years. My son Nicola, who Campbell, he's really into manga. So every once in a while he will shove a manga in my face and say, "Dad, you got to read this." So I've read a few mangas, and so yeah, like Orrin, like it's an art form I appreciate, and even too, like I was quite a bit into art growing up, and I always appreciated specifically. If I were to sort of continue with art, it was going to be pen and ink, right? So like I like the contrast of the black, the white, and the shading just with ink is always sort of cool to me. So sort of the style and the aesthetic of what we're about to talk about, clicked into a certain point because I always liked the pen and ink stuff, just because that's what I liked to do when I would draw. So yeah, so that's my background with that. Even though I'm certainly rusty in the world, I don't follow the world too closely, but I do have an appreciation of it.
Yeah, it's quite a rabbit hole. I think someone wants to get into comics and graphic novels. It's deep. It gets very
Yeah.
deep.
Oh, and I'll
I
probably give a shout out to a buddy of mine, Nicola, who and I will read Troy Little's stuff anytime he and his
yes.
wife, Brenda, when they release something that's usually worth checking out. So I'll name drop there, but he's sort of an exciting artist in the field.
Yeah, that's actually the last comic book slash graphic novel I read was Troy Little's adaptation of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which was
It's a
fantastic to
good
read
one,
right
yeah.
after having read the book. But otherwise, similar to both of you, I fell out of touch with the comic world. There are some of these more, let's say, grown-up forms of comic books that I quite appreciate. There's some Italian artists that I keep up with who use comics to kind of explore societal issues or political issues. There's one especially called Zero Calcare. He has like a couple Netflix animated shows as well now that are pretty good. I don't know how they work in English. I know there's like dubbed versions. So I don't know, maybe check those out if you want. But yeah, so it was interesting going back to A History of Violence, reading this book. Story by John Wagner, art by Vince Locke, who apparently also made some comics of the Judge Dredd stories. Also, a world I'm not super familiar with outside of the movies and the games. But I was fascinated by this graphic novel because of its connection to the movie. And the first time I read it was summer of 21, I believe, 21 or 22. And similarly to the film, people who don't know, it follows, Tom Stoll, this everyday American guy. There's a very strong instance of violence, a robbery gone wrong, you could say, in his coffee shop, and he becomes a local hero. But that brings the attention of some figures from his past. And maybe he actually was not always Tom Stoll. He was someone else in a past life. And it was interesting reading the introduction by John Wagner, where basically he talks about just this fascination with focusing on a normal man's life in an abnormal situation. Does he actually succeed or not? I don't know, we'll talk about it. Randy, what was it like reading A History of Violence for you? What was your experience?
Yeah, like obviously, like the draw to it is the film, right? I'm coming to the graphic novel via the film, um, and so the comps are always going to be there, like as I go through this. But as I'm reading this, like honestly, this plays out in it's sort of pulpy. It's plot driven, but it's got a great hook, right? And this is the great hook that is sort of the advertising campaign for the film, really. But it's this hook that small town shop, and then you've got this act of violence, and then it turns out that there's this guy who's been leading a double life, or is it a mistaken identity? So it's a great hook for the narrative, and it's right there, I'm going to say, in the first third, first fifth, definitely first third,
Yeah.
first half, definitely the first chapter, and then into the second chapter a bit of the book, is that it's just a really compelling story, right? Like it's a simple life, and it's familiar to me as a Canadian, growing up in a relatively small town. Like I sort of connect this, but what if this dude actually has a big history, right? And the more you grow up and you meet people and you realize, oh, I thought they were just a boring dude, but they have a whole history and a whole story.
Mhm.
And so that's something that's just sort of layered into this concept. In terms of, reading the graphic novel, as I mentioned, I sort of like the style of this. I appreciate it, like just sort of the black, the sharp contrast of the pen and ink, and sticking to the just sort of the monochrome. I like that quite a bit. But in terms of going through this, I felt it was fairly pulpy, interesting as I'm going through, but it was really hard for me to disconnect it from what I know is going to be happening in the movie, right? So I'm looking at it through this
Right.
weird lens, where I'm sort of, I'm seeing the future, I'm seeing what this adapts into. But for what this is a linear path, and in the title, a history of violence. This is about one man who has a history of violence, and it is a fascinating hook. And then you sort of uncover this, and oh, this guy's sort of several layers deep, and he has to go confront his past. And I'm there for it. It's a fun brisk read. So yeah, that's sort of my initial response to going through this. And like I say, like the big thing in here, it just got such a great hook to the
Mhm.
story, right? Like oh, he's a family man, and then all of a sudden, like he's got this compelling history with violence and the mafia and that type of thing. But yeah, the first half, I was, oh, okay, this is, I get it, it's very similar to what I'm expecting. But then it does branch off, but it goes in this direction where it's just sort of singularly on this path of this one man's journey going into his own past. And it's fine. I'm on board with that, but I'm not necessarily blown out of the water by it, I
Mhm.
guess.
But
I have
generally
sort of a,
positive, but
it's fine. Like this isn't something I would necessarily write home about and just, oh, everyone's got to check this out per se. But I like it. It was good. It was good. Interesting, the connections that Wagner, and do both of them, were they a team that worked on Judge Dredd, or just one of them? Who was it? Was it
from what I read up, it was
Locke
Vince
or
Locke.
okay?
Apparently, was who created some of the more like extreme caricatures and types of. It's all very like the style of the drawings feel very kinetic, very rushed.
Sure.
I was reading some reviews and someone compared it almost to courtroom sketches, which is
Huh.
an interesting way of putting it. They're very rough by design. It's very much adherent to the stories, more like, I don't want to say hard boiled, but like
Hmm.
neo noir type of the gangster. It's very gritty, it's very grimy, it's very dirty, and it lends itself pretty well, I would say, in that regard, right?
Yeah, and there's something with the artwork too that and keep in mind, I don't know what I'm talking about in this area, but like
No, that's I think.
there's a roughness and a rushedness to the art. You know, like when I think of, someone like John Byrne, whose details with faces and figures was very detailed, right? As with a lot of comic book artists are, right? Because they have to, there's the conventions of making the men's pecs stand out and making the women's figures just perfectly round, and there's this type of thing that has been, part of comic book drawing for a long time. But so the roughness in here. It's not necessarily something I would have vibed with, when I was reading comics, because like the faces feel fairly rushed. But what I do appreciate about it is that there are a lot of characters that are sort of introduced, and because they are just, it feels roughly quickly sketched, they still have to be identifiable from panel to panel. And if I thought that sort of works. Like I was trying to dial into the sort of the creation of this, right, to put myself in that headspace. How does, how do these professionals, how do they craft this, because it is sort of special. Like it's much more than, say, storyboards would be, because who cares what the figures would look like. But you have to sort of create the scene, and you have to have establishing shots and cutaways for certain panels. So so I was sort of vibing with sort of the choices of when to have big panels and when to establish, and when is the page like one full illustration, right? And like the helicopter POV of the farmhouse, right, to set up that confrontation. Sure. Like there's some neat stuff in there. So I was trying to sort of vibe with that. So it works quite nice and flows, right? Like it does have this sort of energy, and it moves quite quickly, and it does have sort of a filmic quality, like a storyboard quality plus. And I sort of like that. And it does create that sensibility of where the story's going and the atmosphere and the characters. So for such rough sketching, I think it is pretty effective, So yeah, I was with it.
Nice. How about you, Orrin? What was your experience with A History of Violence? At least the first half, before we go into the more spoilerific second half of the graphic
Sure,
novel.
yeah. I really appreciate what Randy said about the sketches, because to me that was probably like the most compelling part of the graphic novel, was how it was illustrated, and how it almost reminded me of like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with like how like kind of scraggly and like rough it felt, and I really liked that about it. I will say I was with it. It's really hard for me to read this graphic novel without thinking about the movie, because I've seen the movie like 30 times and I'm like obsessed with that movie, which I'll talk about later. But so like I was trying really hard to read it and be like, okay, like this is read this on your own terms. This is not the Cronenberg movie. And I was really with it for like the first part, I'd say. And then I don't know if this counts as a spoiler because it's at the end of the first part. But there's a moment in this story where there's a lawn confrontation, and in the movie it's done very realistically and it's very like interesting. But in this version, mild spoiler because it's the end of the first part.
Spoil away.
Spoil away. Okay,
go for it. Yeah, full spoilers here for now.
To confront the killers, he shoots a giant propane tank and it explodes. And that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is pulpy as shit. This is like a very pulpy version of the story that I'm used to. And I think the more that I read the graphic novel, the more I appreciated a lot of the choices it was making, because it was exploring a lot of things that Cronenberg does not delve into on purpose and leaves to implication. And I like seeing all of that stuff in the graphic novel, but as I read it, the more overwritten it felt. And I was like, I kind of don't know where this is going. And then it kind of gets to the payoff. And then I kind of felt, okay, this is definitely different from the movie and what it's going for. I'm not sure if I like it. And it's hard because I'm just coming from filtering it through the movie's perspective. But I guess if you read it in a vacuum, it's like a really good hard-boiled violent graphic novel. But when I compare it to the movie, I just think the movie took that source material and recontextualized it in so many different ways that I thought were just more compelling. But that's just how I feel. Yeah,
that's very interesting. It's very close actually to my own experience, because as I said, I read this before, and I think deep down I was already thinking about potentially turning this into an episode, back when I first read it, back when this had another name, this podcast. And then I just didn't, and I felt because I almost wanted to give it a fair shot. Because
Right.
like you were saying, Orrin, like, it's so hard to go into this, even more so than other novels that we've talked about, or even like video games we did an episode on. It's so hard to separate the source material, or like the adaptation itself, from the source material.
Right.
Where I thought maybe it was unfair. First time around I didn't really like it. I was like, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And so after a couple of years, I gave it another shot. I still don't like it.
Yeah. That's where I'm
So like both of you have said, this story is split primarily into 3 chapters. We have the opening chapter, which is, Tom in the town, criminals come, kills the criminals, becomes a hero. Mafiosos from his past come to haunt him. They try to force him to reveal his true identity. Ultimately, he does, in an act of self-defense, wounds one of them, kills the others. And yeah, he just reveals who he is to his wife. And that's like, okay, like you said, Orrin, it's like, it gets a bit crazy if the propane tank, there's explosion. It's very comic booky.
right.
Almost, I want to say almost in a derogatory way. But then it gets into the second chapter, which is primarily just like flashback exposition. Who was this kid? Tom was actually Joey. He was living in New York, baby. He was, always was part, like, close friends with this Richie guy. And they both wanted to get in with the mafia, and they wanted a piece of the pie, and they wanted some revenge, and they go out in the woods, and there's this guy who sells them Uzis and tear gas.
Like, what is going on?
Yeah,
I'm just
this
like,
guy.
where is this going?
It's I don't think it's inherently bad storytelling. My problem, even reading it again, knowing where it goes, is that up until the climax of the first chapter, up until that shootout that we just mentioned, it is a fairly grounded story.
Right.
Fairly gritty, very straightforward, None of the characters really get any characterizations, pardon the repetition, but it's like the wife is just a wife. She's nice. Kids, they're kids. They're barely present in the story, to be honest.
Yes.
And Tom's cool. Tom's a cool guy. Nice family man. Nothing bad about him. And when his past is revealed, when he comes out as Joey, you could say, he's just very apologetic. And who was Joey? Joey was a nice guy. He's a nice kid, got in with the wrong people. His friend Richie kind of dragged him to do some bad things. And it's just so uninteresting to me, narratively. I think there is also this element of just the Italian mafia in New York.
Yes.
There's like the gangsters doing gangster things. The main gangster of this portion, which is also the one from the first chapter who comes to haunt Joey with the like severed finger. it's very out there. It's called John Torino.
Yeah.
Sorry. And there's like one part where there's a shootout in a restaurant, and one of the people in the restaurant actually says "Mamma Mia" with 2 M's. It's not even the 3 M. It's like it's that type of story, and I can take it or leave it. But I feel like it is pulpy in the service of pulp. It is genre thrills, almost to just savor them. It never feels, for something that's called a history of violence, it loves violence.
Yes,
there are so
that's
many
a great
moments
point.
of grotesque imagery. Like I mentioned just now, like John Torino has the severed finger of Joey, and he's just carrying it around in this glass.
Yeah.
With the sheriff saying, like,
As one does.
It's not a crime, though. There's no law that says he can't do it, so it's fine if he has it. Sure,
No
of
law
course.
against being weird.
Yeah, there's like the death of John Torino himself. He like gets killed by a henchman who wants to silence him, and he gets stabbed in the mouth with a knife. There's a lot of moments of explicit violence that borders on the I don't think gratuitous, more exploitative, pulpy, just to make you gross out, just to make you feel like, oh my god, that's nasty. How did you guys feel about just the comic's portrayal and approach to violence, which is something that we'll definitely talk about when we get to the movie itself, which is a key component of it. But just with the comic, how was it for you, Randy?
I think as a standalone, graphic novel, two things are. There's a couple things going on here. So there's this hook, this first chapter, which is great, right? But then ultimately, I think that the idea here is just to sort of serve the conventions, right? So this is a guy that has to confront his past, and it's basically it's John Wick. He gets drawn back into that world.
That's good, actually, yeah.
And then he goes and he does that, but it just plays out like a canon movie would, right? Like we're sort of on the track of this ultimately is going to lead to, sort of the showdown with the people in his life, and they want something from him or whatever, right? And actually there's a little bit more to it than that, but it's all staying in its own lane, right? Like this is exactly where we're going with this, and this is a very comic book path that we're on. But I think probably there's a piece here where the creators are saying, well, what we can do with this as a standalone, we can be more violent than if we had a serialized comic, right? Like, so we can engage more so in sort of the graphic nature of this violence, and we can do a few things, be a little bit more extreme and extremist than we might normally be able to do with some of the other commissioned work that we do or whatever they were working on at the time. But I think that's sort of the thing, is that they can be a little bit more extreme with this as a standalone project. But in terms of a narrative, they've got this cool hook, this good idea, which is the reason we're all here, because it's still amazing. It's an amazing hook and part of the film as well. But then the reveal happens in a different place for the graphic novel than it does in the film, and then after this point, and it's relatively early, right? Like more or less shortly into the second chapter, which is all flashback. But then it's on its path for, I keep trying to get out, but they keep pulling me back in, and we're on that path, and we're just sort of on the straight and narrow. And that's what we're doing. But along the way, I think it's an excellent point. This is probably possibly is a little bit gratuitous. Like it is, sort of an angry, gritty type of violence that gets to be splashed down here in ink. And, that's fine, to me. But I think that's sort of what they're doing, but they're sticking on a fairly, pulpy and fine narrative path. But it is what it is, right? Like the cool stuff in the narrative here lies in the hook and the setup, right? This normal dude isn't what he seems to be. But then just sort of the chapters 2 and 3 feel fairly familiar.
Yeah, which is disappointing considering the introduction that Wagner wrote. I don't know if both of you read it, but I was reading it again, and I was like, I was just like, you talk about like what's interesting about the hook, and then you just don't follow through with it. Just
right.
Like the innocent man, this normal man, and just how abnormal situations happen to him. It's like that's the opening, but then the rest is very by the numbers, like you said, Randy.
Yeah.
How was it for you, Orrin? Just kind of like this portrayal of violence, and we still haven't mentioned probably the most violent part, which is the ending and the reveal at the end, but we can save it for now. We could talk about it in a bit.
Yeah. Like, first of all, when I think about the movie, like, it's not just the sex, or the violence, it's also the sex and how those are intermingled. And one, like, aspect of the violence, beyond the fact that it's very, like, gratuitous and kind of pointless in the graphic novel and pulpy, but and again, it's hard for me not to compare it to the movie, but you brought up the wife character, and she is like so uninteresting in this book. she's just she's like, I'll just be here for you, Tom, or I'm sorry, I can't remember his name in the graphic novel, the protagonist, but like she's very much the loving wife in the graphic novel. There's no like real tension. It's like once the cat's out of the bag, it's like, it's okay, I'll love you forever.
Because it's black and white, man. There's no shades of gray.
No shades of
One or the
gray.
other.
Yeah, exactly. I just love you, but yeah, just generally speaking, the violence. It's just any of the thematic depth that I saw in the movie, it just was not present here. It just felt like it felt like Sin City, you know, like when you read like Sin City
Yes.
or watch Sin City, it's very much like, oh, it's so fucked up. That's like what it felt like the entire time I was reading it. And all of the action scenes are so over the top, like him and Richie in the flashbacks just killing all these mobsters with Uzis. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Like, I'm
Now
sorry, I'm a little bit of a hater.
Head,
A little
Orrin.
bit.
Now, every time I'm going to think of this graphic novel, everyone's going to look like Mickey Rourke.
I know, they do. They kind of do. Ed Harris's character kind of looks like Mickey Rourke a little bit. Yeah.
Just
No,
like
it's,
the very the sharp lines and the chin, you know.
Yeah.
It looks straight out of. You're right. I didn't even think about the Sin City comparison, but you're right. Which I think came out also in the 90s, right? Sin City is like 90s
Thereabouts,
comic,
like-
more or less.
Yeah, I think it was after like The Dark Knight Returns or whatever his famous Batman novel was. So, yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, it's just I think that's kind of my takeaway from the graphic novel is that like when you think about the movie has so many different angles of attack.
Mhm.
I just didn't see any of those in the graphic novel. It just felt very like pulp for pulp's sake, which is fine. But it's like when you have this amazing adaptation, it's hard to feel. You feel like, for comparison's sake, when I read J.G. Ballard's Crash, and then I saw Cronenberg's movie, I was like, damn, like he really captured like what that novel was going for, and it's great. I have like the complete opposite reaction reading the graphic novel for A History of Violence. I'm like, damn, Cronenberg just kind of took this pulpy material and did something totally different with it. It's crazy. Yeah.
Which
Sin
is
City
a
was 91. I just looked it up. The
91,
research department
perfect.
was on it.
Oh, for sure.
And I
Okay.
didn't mention this comic is from 97, actually. So my birth year, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
91 is my birth year. So
Hey.
that's funny how that works out.
It's all connected.
I'll leave mine not said, but my city got a Walmart in 1997.
Hey. Good year, golden year to remember. I think like with what you just said, Orrin, I think what makes this graphic novel worse for me in a way is that there is actually the potential for something better in it. And
Yes.
Wagner himself, I don't know, it feels like he is, he's like on the right road. He's just almost going towards what's actually interesting and then just takes a sharp left. There is this moment, which I really like in the flashback. It's probably one of the only things I like about the flashback, where you have Joey and his friend Richie, where they get inspired to attack the mob, to do what's right for our families and the parents and blah, blah, blah. And they get inspired by watching war movies. And they're like, we're going to prepare this military plan. It's probably, I want to say, it's set in 97. It's been 20 years. Tail end of the Vietnam War, maybe? Or they're watching like some of those movies. They're coming out, maybe Platoon, I don't know. But like late 70s, early 80s, potentially. And I was reading it and thinking, it is interesting to kind of like point a little bit at how, like the new generation is getting inspired by the violence they see on TV and they want to emulate it. I think that's an interesting starting off point for a conversation, for some criticism, for some commentary about how violence from media influences violence in real life. But then, like we said, they have a successful slaughtering of the Italian mob with Uzis. And it's like, if they were to... I can even picture like same setup, okay? They even go to the weird guy in the woods who has all of this military equipment. Why not? I can take that. But then they try to emulate what they see on TV, what they've seen in like a John Wayne movie or something, Green Berets.
Sure.
And they fail because they are 18-year-olds who don't know shit. Who can handle a Uzi, who like misfire the grenade launcher. There could be kind of like an interesting point about just like real life is not like the movies. You can't just take a Uzi and kill 5 people in a restaurant. But that's exactly what happens. And it doesn't really get better in the story itself. It just kind of escalates with Joey now going to New York, trying to find Richie. He thought he was dead. When they were fleeing this restaurant, they managed to get some money, but he lost Joey. He thought he was dead. He was gone. But turns out he's actually been alive. He's been kept alive for 20 years by the lead mafioso, Manzi, something like it's the Manzi crime family. Again, just kind of like introduced kind of like half-assedly in the second chapter. Then they're the main villain in the third one. They've been keeping Richie alive, body completely mutilated, barely any skin on it. It's I think the most striking image of the entire graphic novel, simply because of how strong and memorable it is in its nastiness.
Yeah.
But again, it feels completely detached from any sort of groundedness, and it is closer, now that you mentioned it, it is indeed closer to something you would see with like the Yellow Bastard in Sin City than
That's
something
interesting.
that's
Yeah,
set
that's probably
in
that's probably an inspiration, like that type of.
might actually be now
more,
that you mentioned it, even the style of drawing is very close to it.
Yeah.
But I
yes.
think here, sorry, Nicole,
No.
say, I think that the way we're looking at it now is, because I think that this is just sort of it's just sort of a normal narrative. And I don't dislike it or anything, but it doesn't, capture the imagination. But the way we're talking about it now is probably similar to how Olsen, who did the script adaptation, that's how he looked at it. It's probably how Cronenberg first laid eyes on the source material. It's like, there's ideas in here, and what if, right? Like, what if there could be a conversation in here about these guys who are inspired by, watching violent movies and then sort of partake in violence themselves. There could be a conversation here. I don't think that conversation is anywhere in the graphic novel. I think that, maybe these guys liked certain films, and those couple panels that are sort of paying tribute to watching war films may be a reference to films they like, but I don't necessarily think there'd be a commentary in there. I just think that, sort of the concept here is ripe for ideas, but Locke and Wagner had they were never on that path, right? I think they were inspired by fairly traditional narratives, and they had this really cool conceit and some ideas in there, and it's an opportunity to be grisly. But like, we three geniuses plus Olsen plus Cronenberg see that, there's some cool stuff in here worth picking at. And it was Olsen and Cronenberg that said, there's thematic depth here that is way more interesting to explore than the middle and final chapter of the graphic novel. So I think that's sort of the thing, and I don't begrudge the narrative being sort of plain and sort of being what it is. Like, I think these guys probably like normal comic book stories. They like the action movies of the 80s, and action TV of the 80s, like A-Team type stuff. Like, I think all this stuff is sort of built in here because it's fairly, and definitely stuff like The Godfather and, like this stuff. You can see the love and fascination for this stuff in here. But like sometimes like looking at this as sort of a, I really wish this were different, but it was just never in the cards because it's just not the path that they had for it. But it's like the first third of the race they did really well, and then they just sort of, they let up and coasted the rest of the way.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's so like interesting reading this graphic novel because I think Cronenberg and Olsen were just like, as you were saying, Randy, they were really more inspired by the first part. Like, that's the part that they really wanted to explore and expand on, because the second and third part, as you were saying, Nick, feel like a totally different graphic novel. Like they go in a totally different direction, and it doesn't feel attached at all to the first part. And it almost feels pointless. And to Cronenberg's credit, I know we're not officially talking about the movie yet, but something that I love about David Cronenberg is that he, and you're going to hear that refrain a lot in this podcast. Something I love about David Cronenberg is that
Preach, man. Preach.
My soundbite.
Yeah, exactly. He leaves he's really comfortable with letting the audience catch implications, but also leaving stuff off screen. He knows that you don't have to show every scene in a story, which is why he's like a 90-minute master, right? He makes these amazing 90-minute movies. He's okay if the movie kind of ends like prematurely and it has a cliffhanger. He's okay with not showing everything. And it's like, for example, the part in the movie when Ed Harris is like Joey, he got my eye out or whatever. In the graphic novel, they have that same scene, but because Wagner doesn't have trust in the audience, he's like, okay, let's actually show that flashback. And it's like, why do we have to see the flashback? It's like, and then like all of the stuff with like the DA and like the FBI coming in, like, we gotta interrogate you. It's like, I'm so glad that's not in the movie because it's so boring. I'm like, why do we have to know all this shit about the legal process and whatever? I'm like, this is so overwritten.
It feels like padding. It feels like each chapter has to be 92 pages. And they were like, oh, this story is only 65 pages. FBI investigation. They get interrogated for 5 pages straight. Why not? Just walls of text. It's so funny because you have like usually the opening panels are like nice, clean, and then if you just like jump halfway through, it's just like walls of text. There's like tiny people in the corner that just like text. Yep. I'm talking now. It's all text. It's all text and no subtext in this story. By design, again, probably. It's fine to create something that's just pulp. There's nothing bad with that. I actually like a bit of pulp myself. But I feel like the main problem, as we've talked about, is just the potential. Potential that was not fulfilled by the graphic novel, but potential that maybe, just maybe, was fulfilled by the film. Like you guys said, Olson, screenwriter, he read the graphic novel, he did see that potential, and he decided to write a script, which basically reworks the first chapter of the book into its own 60-minute film, and then just completely changed the ending. Like changing some stuff around, and screenplay gets auctioned around, and it falls in the laps of David Cronenberg. Fresh off the set of Spider, one of his psychological thrillers, he was starting to abandon the more body horror, or like straightforward, let's say, genre filmmaking, starting in the mid-90s with Crash and Butterflies and Spider. And once he reads A History of Violence, he realizes something. When he reads about the character of Tom/Joey, he sees that it's not so different from, Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, or The Mother in The Brood, or Videodrome, or all of his creations, where this man is essentially a creature, a monster, double personality, double halves, split identity, whatever it is. It just intrigued him so much that he wanted to make the movie. A movie that he himself calls was probably too commercial even for Cannes. It was like, no one is expecting me to make a movie like this. It's just like unlike anything I've made. But he really wanted to make it. And hence, we got in 2005, A History of Violence by David Cronenberg, starring Viggo Mortensen as Tom/Joey, Maria Bello as the wife, and Ed Harris as, let's say, like the gangster from the past, renamed as Carl Fogarty from John Torino, and then Richie is played by William Hurt. Orrin, actually, what is your history with this film? I'm super curious in a way. It's your history of violence.
History squared of violence.
So, A History of Violence, I saw this movie in 2005. I was like 14 years old, and I was with a friend of mine, and we saw like this Jodie Foster movie that was like PG-13. It was called like Flight Risk or Flight. I can't remember the name.
Flight Plan.
Oh, where she was as the kid on the plane.
Yeah. And we saw it, and we were like, that was fun. And then we were like, let's try to do a double feature. Let's sneak into this movie called A History of Violence. It has Aragorn from Lord of the Rings in it. And we were kind of expecting like just like kind of a fun throwaway thriller that just has Viggo Mortensen in it. I think this was like one of the first times in my life when I came out of a movie theater And I was like looking at my friend, he was beaming, I was beaming. We were like, what did we just watch? That was awesome. Like we were just like so blown away. And then yeah, that kind of started my 20-year love affair with Cronenberg. It really, because like I got into A History of Violence, I saw Eastern Promises, discovered that he is like this maverick filmmaker with decades of weird and challenging movies.
Was it the
And
rush of getting away with sneaking in and not getting caught? Just the exhilaration.
it, I think part of it was that, but I've just said never had a movie theater experience where at that moment in time, because it was like a nearly packed theater. It was surprisingly packed because this was like back in 2005 when people were still actually going to movie theaters regularly. And it was like watching a hockey game, like just like the way people were responding to the violence. They were like, oh my God. Because it was so shocking at the time seeing that like John Wick style violence in a movie. So it was awesome. And yeah, like I owe a lot to A History of Violence. I think it's the movie that really got me into Cronenberg, but I also through that movie, I was like, who are other directors like Cronenberg? And then I discovered David Lynch after that. So A History of Violence is a pretty seminal movie for me in that sense.
Amazing. Wow.
Gateway
What was
film.
it like for you?
Gateway film, true gateway film. I owe a lot to it.
A true drag afterwards as well, still going strong.
Still going strong 20 years later. Yeah, we are almost at the 20th anniversary of A History of Violence.
True that. Yeah.
We need the new dosage. We need the shrouds straight into our veins injected.
I know, right?
Which is coming
Give
soon,
me that
right? In
late
the
style.
States. I think they've just announced
just
it,
love-
right? It's like April.
Oh yes, it's coming out in April. Yeah, I'm not to go on a tangent, but I am a fan of late style Cronenberg too. I'm very ride or die for him.
Nice.
But it's always fun recommending Cronenberg to people because they're like, "Should I watch Crimes of the Future?" I'm like, you should watch The Fly. But yeah, like I mean, I love crime. Yeah, you gotta have your starter pack of Cronenberg, right? Like if people are not into Cronenberg, you always recommend The Fly, A History of Violence, Eastern Promises, maybe Existence, maybe Videodrome, and it's like, okay, if you like those 5 movies, then go further and then go further, but you can't just like plop them into Crash. They're gonna think you're a psychopath. You know what I mean?
What about you, Randy? What was your experience with History of Violence?
Yeah, I was looking forward to History of Violence coming out back in 2005, and if I'm not mistaken, it debuted at TIFF, but I didn't go that year. And I was like, I would totally love to be there to see that because I'd seen Spider at TIFF a couple years earlier, and it just would be cool to. So I remember that particular regret of not being at TIFF that year. And yeah, but I did see it. I think it was released in the fall, sort of feels familiar. So I saw it in cinemas, I'm going to say October or something. And yeah, I loved it. Like, you know, and I got the DVD as soon as it came out, and I have it right here, right on my desk with me. I've always sort of loved this film. It's just sort of a film I go back to every once in a while, and you know, sometimes I look at it. There's a bunch of different moving parts, and I'm looking forward to chatting about it here because, you know, in some ways it's weird to see Cronenberg and his camera patrolling a high school and weird high school drama in here. And I'm not convinced it necessarily works. However, it has a purpose which totally works. So it's just weird. Like there's some weird stuff in here when you compare it to some of Cronenberg's other stuff. Like the opening shot. Love the opening shot. Such a hook. 4 minutes. 4-minute opening shot. But this is a guy who usually starts off with, you know, a beautiful piece from the score and, you know, just a great title sequence with, you know, art and thematics right in your screen. But here, no shitty motel tracking shot, you know, and it's just such a bizarre sort of jump for him. But and also too, like there's not really, you know, the body stuff, and it's, you know, it's a fairly understandable plot in a way, so it doesn't get, you know, too head trippy in a way. But when you really delve into it, the depth is there, and like it's all these ideas, and just taking this this graphic novel, and then probably, a lot of credit goes to Olsen, but I would say Cronenberg takes it the next step once he gets to the set, because he sees like the depth that he can go into with some of these ideas, whereas the graphic novel was a history of violence, like one dude's history of violence, literally. This film suggests all of us have their own history of violence. There's a history of violence that's underpinning our very society. Like the little daughter in here, she has her own relationship with the darkness and the things that go bump in the night. His wife does as well, even though it's not necessarily a violence type of thing, but it's almost like a fantasy type of thing, like an attraction that she has to the darkness. So that's in here. So it's everything, and this life, this privileged lifestyle that we live in North America is undercut with layers of violence. Like, there's something that struck me this time that I hadn't really thought about, is just even in the last shot or the last sequence of shots, Tom Stahl, Viggo Mortensen's character, returns after the whole story has played out, and the family is eating meat and potatoes. Like, it's what
giant
North America,
meatloaf on the table,
giant
just like,
meatloaf, potato, vegetables. Like, this is iconic in a way, right? Like, this is America, this is Canada, right? This is the type of nation that we grew up with, especially small, medium-sized towns, meat and potatoes. So this is what's being served on the table, family setting, but it's undercut. This can happen because there has been a necessary layer of violence. There's a history of violence underneath this serving and underneath this family life that led us to here. So like, the whole film is caked with this richness of the idea that, yeah, a history of violence. Everyone's got a history of violence. There's a history of violence sort of caked into everything. And I just find that just sort of a fascinating way to look at this film. And I think something like that is exactly what Cronenberg is after, right? Like, this is a thematic film.
Yes.
It's a character-based thing to a certain extent, but I think even more than character, it's about thematic depth, and just this idea that we live in a world of violence, and hopefully it doesn't touch our lives, but it has throughout history, and we don't even know it, right? And there's always something bubbling underneath the surface, just within our own psychology, how someone is willing to deal with violence. Are they going to be passive forever and just sort of get walked over? Or are they going to stand up for themselves? Where does violence come into play? Like, this idea of violence being a spectrum, right? That everyone has to sort of figure out in themselves. Like, this psychology piece is something that just every turn in this film, there's something there. And like with the son, even with the daughter, like the fact that it's just like, and it hadn't really dawned on me, but like, I really had the radar out for watching it this time. It's like, why are we having this scene talking about, oh, there's a monster in my closet? Why? Because everyone has to deal with the bump in the night. Everyone has to sort of, toughen up. And am I going to confront? And, does that involve violence? What level of dealing with shadiness is there?
Mm-hmm.
But everyone has to sort of encounter conflicts. Everyone has to sort of deal with it. And it's there throughout. So that's, like, for me, that's sort of the main takeaway. And it all sort of, it's off this launch pad of the first chapter and the first segment in the graphic novel. But it's so rich in that. But I think this is where Cronenberg he sees, like, oh, there's so much I can say here. There's so much I can sort of dive into between psychology, and I can sort of, touch on the history of a community, and you've got, violence within a small town and violence within the mafia, and it's all here. And he's like, yeah, this is a playing field I don't mind playing in. And
it's a full meal.
Yeah.
It's big. Yeah. It's large.
Yeah. There's a lot of meat and potatoes in here. So I think that's where this goes, and I'm here for it. And it's always sort of a fun watch.
Yeah, that warms my heart. Warms my heart. I did want to
I just wanted to piggyback off of that. Again, I was saying earlier, there's so many different, this movie is like a prism to me. There's so many different ways you can like look at it. And one of my favorite ways to watch it is like David Cronenberg's Paul Verhoeven movie. And what I mean by that is Paul Verhoeven is really famous for making movies like Starship Troopers, Total Recall, where it's like, if you take it at face value, it's just like an action movie. But then, like, when you
Mhm.
look at it metatextually, it's like, oh, they're emulating a propaganda film, you know, like in Starship Troopers,
Yeah.
like you're watching a fascist propaganda film. A History of Violence to me is like watching an old John Wayne Western, but if the implications were unearthed, you know, it's like you're watching this American myth unfold of protecting the homestead, killing to protect your family, and like all these things that are kind of like intrinsic values of classic Westerns. But Cronenberg like picks at it like, you know, a surgeon. He's like, okay, so what does this ideologically mean for the media we consume, America in general, how we solve problems with violence? And it's like so fascinating. And he even leans into it with like the mise en scène. Everything looks like a Norman Rockwell like painting, and all of the acting has kind of like this weird soap opera melodramatic flavor to it, kind of like you're watching like a meta commentary of an older film. And I don't know, it's just like there's so many angles to attack this film, and I could tell based on Randy kind of gushing about it, it's like you could watch it so many different ways with so many different contexts because the themes and characters are so rich.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. A lot of different things to talk about. But yeah, like, to be very brief, my own experience with this movie. I actually first watched it, I want to say it was either like 2010 or 2011. I was 14 years old as well. And I remember when it came out in 2005, I just saw the cover, which is the same one that Randy has, kind of like the international cover art. And I was like, ooh, Aragorn, like you are. I was like,
Yeah,
I like
exactly.
him.
Yeah.
I want to see it. And my
Hidalgo.
parents were like, no. It was like forbidden for people under 14. I was like 10. No, I was like 8 years old, and they're like, no, you're not watching this. You're not. We tried watching Captain a la Triste. How do you say it in English? I think something like that. You know, it's like a Spanish adventure film with Viggo Mortensen.
It's not like Captain Fantastic, is it?
No,
It's
that's
not
another
that.
one. That's another one.
Yeah.
We made
Is
it
it-
2004, 2005.
Is it
kind of.
Hidalgo?
It might be Hidalgo.
It's not.
That's-
It's another one. It's,
No?
it's like completely unknown. But it's
Research
called.
the-
It's like
It's on it.
it's a Spanish production. I want to say it's like in Italian. It was called like Captain alla Triste, which was the name of the character. I bought the book. I read the book. It was like a series of adventure Spanish set novels from like the 17th
Yeah, I'm like
century.
looking through my
Oh,
IMDb.
Ella Triste.
Just
That's
alla
it.
Triste. Okay, yeah, there you
Yep.
go.
Oh, wow,
That was the
I've
only
never
one I
even
could watch
heard
with
of this
Viggo
movie.
Mortensen from the time. But A History of
Okay.
Violence became one of those like forbidden films. The moment my parents were like, "You can't watch it," I was like, "I really want to watch it now." And the beauty of the internet in 2011, I managed to add like this tiny little laptop all by myself for school, and I managed to find a way to watch A History of Violence. Was I
So
too
you watched
young?
it at school?
No, at home.
Oh.
In the quiet of my room by myself, kind of like, this is secret, people mustn't know I'm watching it. I was like, this is an adult film, it's only for adults, I'm not an adult yet. But it was such a special, kind of like what you were saying, Orrin. It was unlike anything I had seen until that point, especially when it comes to violence. I will definitely tackle how David Cronenberg himself always approaches violence in his movies, but especially in this film. Even going forward, to be honest, I think this is like a changing point for him in his filmography, even in that sense. But also, it was at that point probably the most explicitly sexual film I'd seen. It was one of the darkest movies I'd watched, and it just left me with so many emotions, and it was exhilarating. And I think I rewatched it almost the same month, and I was just kind of like talking about it to everyone. I was like, this movie is amazing, it's great! And everyone else was starting to watch like Iron Man 2 or whatever. It's like, no, whoa, Eastern Promises? Let's watch Eastern Promises. Oh, wow. So I stayed pretty much. I remember I went into the cinema to watch A Dangerous Method because it came out in like 2012 here. It was like this 15-year-old kid going to one ticket, or two tickets, dragging a friend along. 2 tickets for A Dangerous Method, the Freud movie.
Are you still friends with? Are you still friends with that person?
I am actually. Yeah. I'm like his movie pusher. I keep giving him recommendations. Doesn't always work out, but is a good friend of mine. We watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Nocturnal Animals, like everything that Only God Forgives, like Jesus, like things that a normal teenager would not go to watch at the cinema with his friends.
It's like the anti-Pixar.
Everyone else I went to the cinema with never came back with me. Like I went with other people to watch Only God Forgives, and they were like, "You're done. You're not picking a movie anymore." Okay, we're watching Hangover Part 3 next time. Okay,
Nicola's been blacklisted.
pretty much. I was that kid. Okay, like in high school, I was that guy. I was like the weird guy who likes weird movies. A nice badge of honor. But yeah, no, History of Violence. So it became my first Cronenberg. Maybe because of that, it's still my favorite Cronenberg. It's definitely the one I've rewatched the most over the years. This was my 5th time watching it.
Wow.
And it just delivers. It just delivers every single time. Because of everything that the both of you have said. So let's just dig into this. I think the first thing I really want to talk about, something that wasn't really in the graphic novel, characters with interesting characterizations, with personalities, with complexities to them. How did you feel about not just, Tom/Joey, played by Viggo Mortensen, but also just the rest of the cast? Because to me, I think, especially like back then, I don't think I'd seen The Truman Show yet. I think this was my proper introduction to Ed Harris, and I was blown away. I don't think I'd seen him in anything else, or at least it didn't stood out up until then. I was like, who is this guy? He is amazing. How do you guys feel about the cast and the way the characters are just developed in here compared to the graphic novel?
Cool. Well, can we start with Maria Bello?
Go for it. Love her.
I love Maria Bello. She's amazing in this, and I'm trying
generally very underrated, I would say. It feels like she's dropped off. She hasn't made a movie in a few years.
I don't necessarily know her from a lot, but I had seen her in Coyote Ugly. I think she was in that before this, but she has just such a cinematic face. Like she is just sort of so classically beautiful, but she's so good here, and for her character has such a spine, and I like how Cronenberg plays with her character a little bit, and and through her brings in the element of intimacy, and how even with love and sex, there's this idea of that too can get rough or get violent, or there can be an edge to it, and I think that we see that, and that it's fascinating in her character in a way that so she's into role playing, and she dresses up as the cheerleader, and
one of the key American symbols, the fantasy of the cheerleader.
Yep. Absolutely. And then also that there's a choice in here to make her a lawyer, right? So what she does is she knows so insofar as that there's this spectrum, like where would you handle this type of confrontation or violence? She knows exactly what to do. She goes out immediately. She doesn't consult her husband. She goes and gets a restraining order. She knows exactly what to do. She's not just a mama to her child. She's a mama bear. Like she goes after Ed Harris in the mall. So like she's got this spine too. You can say, oh, well, she's not really violent or anything, but she's got this spine, right? And I think like she too, her character and the development of this character has sort of gone through where's this character on the spectrum of where they would stand up for and just sort of dig in their heels and fight for what they believe in. And so. And would they get violent or confrontational? So yeah, she is aggressive. She's confrontational, and then sort of bringing in the intimacy level here too. There's also something I think in this small town lifestyle. I get the impression she's always lived here or around here, that Tom appealed to her as a sort of a mystery man, as an outsider, and there's still a little bit of that she loves in him, because when she finally finds out that he's Joey, then you've got this really chaotically erotic scene on the steps where, and just as an actress, what a trooper, this sex scene on the steps. She must have been bruised because the two of them are flopping around on the steps, on these hardwood steps. And and I think I remember reading somewhere, seeing an interview somewhere where she was saying that she did sort of get banged up, and but I think that's sort of an interesting take. And this is something Cronenberg, has long been interested in, right? Going back to Shivers and Rabid. Go ahead.
For a second, it's just that Cronenberg himself read the script and there were no sex scenes. And he just went to us and was like, we need them. Like, we need to show this. We need to show the duality of this relationship. Not only to show kind of like, I'm not sure, that's something I listened to the commentary track, which is very fun, with Cronenberg, and he was talking about, like, first of all, it's like the first American mainstream movie to portray 69, and he was very proud of that.
Came up.
And also he said it's one of very few movies that has sex scenes exclusively with a married couple who's adult and who's very intimate in a positive way with each other. And it's something that you definitely see in the first scene with the role play.
Yet still
which is
in a way
rare.
that you haven't seen before, too, right? Like,
it still
with
feels
the 69, with with the role playing, like it's just this sort of interesting layer that is not just traced on to Bello, but just the relationship. Interesting point. Yeah, so like I really like Bello, and I really like how her character is fleshed out here in just a few of these moments, which much stronger than anything we see in the graphic novel. And I think too, like this is by design.
She's a known character in the graphic novel.
She's terrible in the graphic novel. Oh my god!
Yes,
just like,
exactly.
I love you, husband. Do whatever you want, husband.
That's one of the funny things that in an interview with Maria Bello, she said, like, I got the script the first time, I just gave it a quick read through, and I was like, oh, it's the wife. It's like, I'm not interested. Then she just picked it up again, and she said, wait a minute. Wait a minute, there's more here, actually. There's something here that's way more interesting than just the usual wife, which is exactly what the character is in the graphic novel. Just the wife, and that's it. She has no personality.
I love the line delivery she does to Ed Harris in the mall. She's like, you stay the fuck away from my family. Like, I love how she says it.
Yeah, always very torn. There's... You can feel an inner conflict. That's something that surprised me from the book, from the way they developed the stories, that everyone just kind of accepts. It's like, oh, you were Joey? Oh, that sucks. Well, you're a good guy, I guess, though. Sure, the violent past, don't go back there. But instead here it's all about the way she comes to terms with it. Not only Viggo Mortensen, we can talk about him in a second as well, but just like,
in a way she doesn't come to terms easily with it, right? No,
and there's like the moment where she almost says the truth to the sheriff friend that comes over the house, but then she actually defends the husband, and she breaks down crying, which feels like part of an act, but then it's actually her true emotions. It's so many, like, you can just see it on her face, the conflicting emotions. It's something that comes to life, I think, on repeat viewings. It's really, because it's the first time you're watching it, you don't know what's going on. Oh my god, he's actually Joey, and you're just like honed in on Viggo. But rewatching it, I think she steals the show. She's like, I think she's the heart of the movie, the secret MVP.
In a way, yeah, because there's so much into her moment where she's sort of processing this, and like when you can really see the betrayal, right? And I love the line, like, and I forget how it starts, but it ends up with "my name, Jesus, my name." What is my name? My name is fiction. If you're fiction, like I'm fiction, like it's just like the betrayal.
Stalls.
Yeah,
this is such like a made up Norman Rockwell name.
Which is so, like, that's something that's underrated in general with Cronenberg. Just a funny guy. There's so much humor. Even when she asks him, she's like, "How did you get the name?" And he's like, "It was available."
That's a great line. It was there.
In the graphic novel, it's like, it was another guy, but those things are easy. Social security number, just easy. Just sure, why not? At least here they make it into kind of like, don't think about it. It's fine. It's kind of a joke. It was available. Sure.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember laughing so hard the first time I saw the movie. It's like in this family we don't hit people. Yeah, in this family we shoot them. I just like laugh. It's so good. Yeah, I love the humor in his movies.
That's something that rewatching it, especially, like I've seen a lot of people compare this to prestige TV dramas. Like, it feels like watching it now in our contemporary, post AMC, Mad Men, Sopranos, everything climate. I can see why some people see it as kind of like a okay episode of prestige TV.
Breaking Bad. the duality of character.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's been explored on a deeper level, or like at least on a longer level on television. But what I like about Cronenberg is that he's just a master of tone. And
Yeah.
even he manages to have, in the span of like 5 seconds, a laugh and a gasp, a cheer and horror. And that's something that works really well for me with the way that he portrays the violence in this film. Because usually, like, I think it was you, Orrin, right? You mentioned John Wick. Like those movies, that type of violence and action. And all those instances in the shootouts and the stabbings and the beatings, it's like, yes! You don't jump, just stab the guy, shoot him in the head. And it's cool, and it's slick, it's clean. In this movie, you get they're very short sequences of violence. They're just outbursts, nasty, messy, dirty, shot in very unusual ways. There's very few wide shots in this film, just generally speaking. A lot of the action just plays in close-ups on a wider lens as well, which kind of distorts the image. And in all of those sequences, you have that explosion of like a gunshot. It's like, bad guy's dead. But then you see, like in the failed botched robbery in the first act, it's like the guy is just like on the floor with his mouth ripped open, flopping tongue.
Classic scene.
And it's like, fuck, it's brutal. It's, violence. It's not fun. It's not nice. And even in something that you mentioned, like that scene with the son, when the father confronts the son, and it's like, no, in this family we shoot people. It's a funny one-liner kind of thing. But then the slap that comes right after, it's like, it kills that laugh. Like, you want to, no. It just, and that's something that Cronenberg has mastered after so many years of just doing that. And it plays well with this film. Just his exploration of America's history of violence, cinema's history of violence, right?
I always kind of going back to your prestige point. I always I kind of think a history of violence is almost like a lost art in a way, because to me it's like, if this movie were made today, it would be a 6-season TV show, or like a 4-season whatever. There is something amazing about how Cronenberg can just take the story, compress it into like a 90-minute purposeful movie. And it's like, that's it. That's the story. I just think that's a lost art these days, because everything is about, you need to like explore the backstory of the lampshade over there and the clerk. How did the clerk respond to Tom Stahl's violence? It's like everything has to be so epic in scope with so much content, and it's like Cronenberg just says, we're telling this story in 90 minutes. Bam, we're done. And I just think that's great.
Well, for instance, in the graphic novel, the whole second act, the whole second chapter is flashbacks. Whereas in here, Ed Harris at one point he references getting his eye sort of popped out with barbed wire, but in the graphic novel we see the whole scene, right? Like it's just sort of the instinct to explain, and Cronenberg has the instincts that, but my story's not about plot, so I don't need all of that, right?
There's a lot of just instinctual filmmaking, and also a lot of trust with the actors. One thing that I like is that 100%, let's say this became even a 10-episode miniseries. One episode would be entirely about the opening duo of criminals. I was like, how did they become like this? How did they get here?
Right.
In here, it's just like, it opens and it's like, oh, who are these two characters? Oh, they're bad. Oh, they shoot a little girl. They're really bad. They're really bad. That's all you need. I know the actors created their own backstory, which worked for them, and Cronenberg was like, I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. You do your thing. If it works, great. You do your actor thing, and it's trust, and it's the beauty of simplicity. Even the way, like, it's genuinely mind-boggling the way he so cleanly creates sets up the family dynamics in 2 scenes. The family comes to comfort the kid in bed who is having the nightmare. The family is having breakfast, and that's it. You get it.
Yeah.
You get the husband and wife have a very loving relationship. There's a good understanding with the children. They're both very not mature, but they're smart. They're very well intentioned people. It's like that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
You didn't need more.
Yeah, I always say that. I always point to like movies like A History of Violence and like Fargo. Those are usually my two
Nice,
go-to
yeah.
examples of like these movies are just like perfect exercises in economy. Every scene has a purpose, and it never overstays its welcome. It's so just well constructed. Like it is to me like a fine-tuned Apple Watch in terms of how well edited it is, and it blows my mind. And I guess like another thing that I was kind of thinking about, because one of my favorite filmmakers is Robert Bresson. He like I love Pickpocket, I love Ahazar Balthazar, I love Mouchette, and something that I love about Bresson is that it's how he films actions. He's always has like close-ups of hands doing actions, like pickpocketing someone or whatever. And I saw, because David Cronenberg recently released his favorite movies of all time list on like Letterboxd or something, and I saw Pickpocket there, and I was like, oh my gosh, every time I watch A History of Violence, I'm like, the way the violence is choreographed is so similar to Bresson, and now I actually have proof that he was inspired by Bresson. I was like, hell yeah, like that's so cool. But just wanted to bring that up because like there's something about how he choreographs action and violence, and like as you were saying, Nick, with the tone, it will just be like you'll see the action of like the guy firing the pistol, and then you see like the bullets explode in the squibs, and it's all very particular and stuff. And then you see the you have the exhilaration of it, but then you see the reaction shots of people being like appalled by it, and then you see the close up of the guy's blown off face. It's like it's very Bressonian, and I just think it's really interesting how he uses that inspiration.
And it's all very static. The way,
Yes.
it's very. I mean, that's something that's just Cronenberg in general. I would say it's very clinical when it comes to the body, and all those action scenes, if you want to call them action scenes, but like moments of violence.
Right.
It's a better description. They're all like camera here, camera there. There's no whip pans. There's nothing that potentially could not be misinterpreted as glorifying the violence. Even though I have very disturbingly read some reviews, I was going through Letterboxd people that I followed, a couple of them were like, yo man, like the action's so cool here. It's like, no. Like, if your takeaway is the action is cool.
I will say that I think that's part of the movie's genius, is that it captures our biological thrill of violence while still acknowledging the consequences of that. And I don't think I've ever seen a movie do that ever. Like
it's animalistic, right?
It's very
like it's
animalistic
just primal in that sense.
Yeah, because it's like movies are always either like being like the violence is disturbing or the violence is exhilarating. This is actually a movie that does both at the same time, which is crazy that he was able to do that.
Well, it's quite pragmatic because you have the excitement of this heist or this moment in the diner, but you dwell. It feels like you're dwelling. It's probably just 2 or 3 seconds that we actually see the guy McHattie, the actor, on the ground with the prosthetic and his jaw blown off. But you sort of live with the consequences, right? Like it's interesting that you mentioned, Nico, that like it's all these sort of relatively static setups. And so just one of the segments I did see in one of the featurettes that I watched about it was that Cronenberg doesn't rely on storyboards, but this sequence felt like it did, because it lives in the edit. So I don't know if he has the instincts to sort of capture all the coverage that he needs for the edit, or if a scene like this, because this is sort of a make or break scene in a way for the film, if he has a storyboard going in. But just, it was interesting just to sort of see him talk about his style a little bit in terms of, and others talk about his style where he arrives on set, with ideas in his head, but then he meets with the actors and he does run-throughs with the actors, and then he figures out how the shot list will and the coverage will fall from that. But with something like maybe this moment with there's the edit of you got to get the coverage of Viggo jumping over, and then the close-ups of glass flying and the coffee pot striking the face, and it just seems like maybe a bunch of this is maybe storyboarded. But I was just interested in finding out his style is fairly laissez-faire.
Yeah, he like really something that I really like about his style is that I always kind of I like there's like a Twitter account that I follow, and he's like a friend of mine. It's like the Dude American Saga. If you're listening to this podcast, I'm shouting you out. But he said like in a tweet that David Cronenberg style, it's like kind of lame and kind of toned down, but it's also epic and awesome. And I think what he means by that is that it's so like bare and shot reverse shot and very sparse, but because of that, it feels very purposeful. And the violence and the sex just explodes on the screen because of how spare it is, and you just see that in these scenes, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you said, Randy. Just like, oh my god, the opening shot, that 4-minute tracking shot, which in like any other like action movie or whatever would be so like, yeah, tracking shot. But in here, it just holds so much purpose, character. And also to have, like, in a 90-minute movie, a 4-minute opening shot with people who are not the protagonists, who die after 20 minutes, pretty much. It's just
There's
like
4.2% of your movie right here.
Yeah. It's like, and you're using it for this? It's like, yes, he is. Yes, he is. And it's just so many bold little choices. So we were talking about, in the graphic novel is about the Italian mafia, New York, all of that. In here, they change it to Philadelphia. And they change it to the Irish mob, because you have a lot of different, like, well, Ed Harris cannot play an Italian. You'd never buy him. It's got to be kind of like Irish. But also, we have William Hurt. Richie. In the graphic novel, Richie was the friend who gets abducted and then is tortured for 20 years without limbs. In here, Cronenberg, also again, like Cronenberg just reading the script, it was like, no, Richie has to be the brother. That's gonna be kind of like the final thing has to be like Joey goes back home, goes back to his brother, and has to kind of like completely shut the door on his past. And so instead of having this incredibly convoluted sequence, like going back to the mafia and the guys take him and is getting brought to the thing and Manzi and stuff, it's very simple. It's just like now Joey accepts that he has to kind of like, close this chapter of his life that has come back to haunt him. And he travels to Philadelphia and he goes to see his brother, who's this criminal lord, kind of like an underground boss type guy, who's played by William Hurt. R.I.P., bless him. Oscar-nominated performance? I want to say maybe a bit random. To be honest, I love him in this movie as well, but for some reason, just I don't know why they went for him, not Ed Harris of all the performances in this movie. But sure, why not? I'm curious to know how you guys feel about this climax, even compared to where the graphic novel ends up, because the graphic novel definitely revels into the violence of just, the guy has to go save his friend and get the revenge. Meanwhile, in this film, it's all very personal. It's all very intimate. We talked about like sexual intimacy, but the violence feels intimate here. And Joey's arc, Tom's arc, is incredibly intimate. So what do you guys think about this final confrontation when he goes to his brother's house, to Richie's house?
Well, I will launch off a couple things. I was just trying to find out who else was nominated that year, because I remember, because I followed the Oscars really closely, and I was like, that is such a peculiar nomination. Like, it's so weird. Clooney. That was Clooney for Syriana. And Matt Dillon for Crash. Matt Dillon for The Bad Crash. Paul Giamatti for Cinderella Man. And Jake Gyllenhaal for Brokeback. Yep.
Paul Giamatti for Cinderella Man.
Yep.
What a year for the Oscars.
And William Hurt. So yeah. The
What a
Clune
weird
won that
group
year.
what a weird group, man. Jesus,
So there you go. Okay. Yeah, very bizarre. It does so much thematically. Like this is part of the hook, and to tie into Orrin's take here and his theory, this is sort of a, you can look at this as sort of a Verhoeven thing. If you just let the film wash over you, then you can get you can extract the entertainment value, and it is what it is. So this, Richie and Viggo Mortensen having to sort of reconcile with his past and, close the door on his past and confront his old demons and all. It just plays out, and it just sort of, it fits that purpose where, okay, you can let this film wash over you and you get the entertainment value. It's boom, there. However, I think that there's further thematic depth to this, right? Right within your own family, there's inevitably violence. You can say that, violence has led to the wealth of America. Like if you sort of peel back the history of America, you're going to see episode of violence after episode of violence, and that's where Richie got where his life is, right? And then you can also sort of say, okay, well, that type of violence breeds this mindset of greed, because Richie even says at one point, because I think Viggo says, well, you're doing pretty well, nice house, and he goes, yeah, but I still feel I'm behind the 8 ball, right? So why does he behave the way he does? Like, why does he have this violent approach to his enterprises? Because it's about being the best and the greatest and just more. So like all these little comments are in there as they connect to, having a history of violence, not just personally, not just familial, but also, as a country or as a people. I think that's sort of caked in there as well. And I like that. As for Hurt, I always ever thought this was sort of a bonkers performance, but this time that I watched it, I think he's just having fun, and more power to him. Like so I think I finally, sort of reconciled that. Yeah, come on, Randy, don't get the stick out of your butt. This is William Hurt having fun. So
Brohim.
Brohim. Yeah,
so I think Hurt is just, he's sort of having a blast, and he's not known for these types of roles. So more power to him. So it's fine. It certainly stands out, but yeah, like he's fine and having fun.
It's very funny. Small connection to the previous episode we did for the podcast. We talked about Into the Wild, and he plays kind of like there. He plays the classic William Hurt, kind of like the father with the mustache, who's very strict, very American. And in here, it's kind of like even just how do you even call it? What's like his beard style there? I don't even know what the name is. Kind of like just beard, no mustache.
Pretentious. Right. I don't know.
Beard.
You go to the barber. Yeah. Can I have the pretentious look, please?
Can I have the pretentious goatee?
I'm trying to be a hipster Irish gangster here. Okay.
You go with this picture to him. I want this, man. Okay.
But he is just eating this up, and this time I guess I see it like as soon as Viggo Mortensen sees him, and William Hurt is just decidedly going to chew up the scenery, and he just sort of slowly leans in, and they bump heads like they must have done when they were kids, and he gives him 2 kisses on the cheek, not 1, 2, and he sort of backs away. It's all very, very intentional. I couldn't see that it wasn't just fun this time. So yeah, I sort of like him. I've turned a corner on William Hurt's performance.
Nice.
Yeah, I think a big point of contention with the history of violence, the movie, is how people feel about the third act, because like the tone of the movie changes a lot in the third act, but I personally just love it because it kind of reveals itself as a black comedy. Like the violence gets way more over the top in like the most hilarious ways. You have William Hurt just being like, how did you fuck that up? How did you fuck that up?
Yeah.
He just shoots the henchman. It just becomes a black comedy. And I just love it. I think it adds a texture and a richness to the film that like you saw this like kind of drama for the first 60 minutes, this family drama. And then it kind of turns into this black comedy about violence in America and all of that before settling back into a family drama for the final scene. And there's so many great moments in this sequence too. Like the how do you fuck that up? That being a big one. But even like in the graphic novel, like in order to get all this information about Joey Cusack or Joey, is you see these flashbacks, right? These extended flashbacks. Here, Cronenberg will just have like these little tidbits that kind of hint to who Joey Cusack was and how fucked up he was. Like the part when Richie is like, "Didn't you like bang her on the table back at a bar in Philadelphia? Yeah, she was something." It's like you're getting these insights into how fucking crazy Joey Cusack was. And I just love how like he'll just have Cronenberg will just put in these lines of dialogue that just kind of suggest it, and then he doesn't explore it any further. He just lets the implication simmer, and I just think that shit's great.
Yeah, and what I especially like about that entire conversation is that William Hurt plays it as if his brother had just left. You know, they just met like maybe a week earlier or something. Comes back, he's like, "Hey, bro, how are you doing?" Very familial, very colloquial in that sense. But the way that Viggo plays it is completely at a distance. Even when it's just like the waitress line. And he's like, "Yeah, no, I never did that." It's kind of like keeping it a bit serious, keeping it, you know, it feels like, in a way, the brother is still stuck in this past, stuck in the memories. Can you believe that place is still up? Remember it? All those little mentions. And Joey is kind of like gone. He's dead. He's in the past. He doesn't want to go back in the past. He wants to leave it behind. And his brother is just stuck in it. And one thing that I like is that he's also very inept. That's something I forgot, but it's like he's a terrible shot. He just can't hit his brother like 6 meters away. They're trying to find him.
He's making the choice not to extend his arm to shoot, right?
It's like,
shooting from the hip. It's all about image with that guy.
Shooting from the hip, like a cowboy. And there's a lot of like American cowboy Western symbolism. The Howard Shore score, which is fantastic in here, one of my favorites. But it is very Westerny. But just with the incompetence, I think the funniest part for me is that he goes outside the mansion and the door closes behind him, like Joey/Tom closes the door behind him, and he's just like fumbling with the keys. Like, "Oh, I need to get back inside my house." Let me just get the keys.
I love David Cronenberg goes full black comedy here. It's almost like a Coen Brothers movie. Like even the part when he dispatches those two henchmen in the boss's room, and then as he's leaving, he just breaks the guy's neck. It's just like the goofiest thing ever, but it's
twirling on
hilarious.
himself and leaving the door.
It's so good. Like every time I've seen that movie with other people, they all just burst out laughing at the neck snap.
Which is it could be so easy to just think you're laughing at the movie. That was something that made me a bit sad reading some negative reviews. They were like, "Why was it so funny? It was so stupid at the end." It's like, no, but that's the point. Like I love this. I was listening to Cronenberg talk about it. It was like, yeah, we were working on like a score with Shore, but then it was just removing the tension, and it was actually a very funny scene. And it's way better if there's no music throughout, because it makes it funnier.
Yeah.
Like it's impossible to watch it and don't see that Cronenberg is the first one laughing at it with the editor. Just like, this is amazing, just the rhythm of it and everything.
Yeah, he has such like an instinct for that. Even like freaking like Crash has really funny moments. Like,
all of his movies, honestly, all of his movies.
Yeah, just the way he's able to like, and I think like it is almost a media literacy thing. When people watch a lot of Cronenberg movies and they take it too seriously, it's like, no, the humor is there. You're just not allowing the self-awareness and the humor to like kind of wash over you. But
well,
everything can
coexist. A lot of it is like he knows what he's engaging in with, tension, and he's showing things that make people uncomfortable or whatever. But then he's just got a knack to, okay, well, now would be a good time to sort of, cut the tension, right? So, and that's where like a little throwaway, joke or levity carries a little bit more weight in his film, right? Because he's setting you up in the tone and or suspense or something in sort of the main view, but people are sort of amped up if they're following along. So then he'll sort of cut through that with a moment of levity. I always think of this the line in Crash in the back seat where Elias Koteas is with the prostitute and he gets her bubble gum. "We don't want that being blown up the urethra."
I was thinking of that exact scene from Crash. That's so funny.
Because But this is a guy who's been making films for a long time, and he's never really, yielded to, oh, let's make a highly commercial film. Like he's always ever engaged in doing the type of stuff that he wants to do. So like he's just got a sensibility around, okay, well, if this is working the way that I'm thinking it is, then this is tense. This would, so a moment of levity would work here. Like I think his instincts are just sort of finely tuned to that, just because of the type of storyteller he is and his experience. And yeah.
Yeah. And Cronenberg, one thing that's also very under talked about, is that even a term? I don't know. Something that's not discussed often with Cronenberg is his politics. The fact that his movies, even though they superficially could be seen as just like, I mean, not even superficial, but just like they could be seen primarily as those stories about identity, body horror, kind of like the transformations that both body and soul go through time. They are also inherently very political texts in more or less overt ways. I think easily, like his Stephen King adaptation, what's the Dead Zone? That's 100% political stance during the Reagan era, just as the book itself was. But one thing, rewatching this after having reread some articles as well from and looking at movies from the time, it's very much a text from the Bush era, the Bush administration. Especially with the element of just, we talked about the history of violence, we talked about the characters kind of like hiding their past, and you mentioned even like the violence of Maria Bello, like that she has this allure for it, this attraction to it. It is very much part of that time period, which still also kind of applies to today's time period, which is that obsession with Christianity and purity, and of kind of like trying to portray the United States primarily as this great country, amazing place. Look at it. It's very stereotypical. You mentioned like Norman Rockwell paintings, Orrin, which is a great point of reference. It's just like, this Americana, the country life. It's so beautiful. It's so pretty. Everyone loves each other. This is the perfect family. They are all they are Christians as well. You see like those crosses very overtly present in certain scenes. But then the actual actions, actions speak louder than words. And it's way different, the reality of the fact. And it kind of underlines this inherent darkness that was present back then in like a post 9/11 type world, where violence was everywhere. You could deny yourself that, no, things are fine, things are okay. But then, chaos could happen out of nowhere. It could be, the Twin Towers, which, like connection, they are prominently featured in a transition panel in the graphic novel. I was like, whoa! It's
with
still,
two airplanes pointing at them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a bit.
Yeah. You know what? On that, Nick, I'll just add, like, I feel in thematically, this film is sort of Lynchian, because when I think of the opening of Blue Velvet, and it's Americana, white picket fences, small town, happy-go-lucky, life is good. But then the camera descends and goes into the grass, and you can see that there's a grisly, there's something grisly underneath, right? And that's what this film is completely, right? And Twin Peaks is that. So this fits nicely alongside of a lot of Lynch's work, because of that specific thematic, right? You've got on the one hand, oh, well, this is a prominent, clean-cut, American, Canadian family, and, this is how they live, and we protect our own, and we're good people around here. However, peel that back, everyone's got a story on an individual level, but you peel that back history-wise, this community has a story, this country has a story, and there are grisly layers to it, and things aren't as simple or as clean-cut or as, easy to take home to your parents as as it might seem, because everyone's got a story, and like that really strikes that chord for me. Like in this film strikes that chord. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think you can even like take that idea of how it's kind of dissecting the American identity and kind of apply it to like these greater ideological implications. Like something that's very American, especially during the Bush era, is solving problems with violence.
Mm.
You know, like it's like the classic Untouchables line, like they bring a knife, you bring a gun, you, like whatever. And I think like that's a lot of what the third act of this movie is partly about. It's like he's kind of going there like to make peace with his brother, but really it's to kill him. It's like really there's really like it's very an American film in in that sense that ideologically in media people always solve problems with violence. In our politics, we solve problems with violence. And I think that's really what this movie is kind of tapping into. Not just on a political level, but like, again, on a biological level, because that's what Cronenberg's interested in. It's like, why do
Yes.
we as people have this allure to do these terrible things to other people? Because it's in our self-interest, you know? Or it's like, or it could even be like an evolutionary instinct. It's very interesting.
And it's
And
in
it's
the sun too, right? Like we didn't really
I
talk
was
about
just
the
about to
bullying.
say
Oh,
yes.
totally.
Yes.
Go ahead,
Totally.
take it away, Nick.
No, go.
Yeah, because the sun is sort of interesting here, and like we get a few moments where I do feel it, like Cronenberg hanging out with the 90210 crowd seems a little bit weird. There's some weird dialogue in there and stuff, but
One
it's
of
for
very
a
few
purpose.
cases, I think. I can't even remember like other movies that have teenagers with
Yeah, or
Cronenberg.
this type of set
Yeah,
or this
yeah.
type of setting. It's an oddity, right?
Yeah, like a high
But
school
it's
setting. Yeah.
but it's for a purpose, right? Because when the sun explodes, it's a great moment, right? The baseball scene and the bully. I think that's not really solid stuff. Like, why is the bully pushing the kid around because he caught a fly ball? It's not like it was a tough play and the kid ran and dove and caught it and stole the winning run. No, it
It's
was
like,
hit right to him.
yeah,
And like, yeah, I would say Cronenberg might not know that much about baseball, because it was a soft fly ball to right field. Why was the kid so upset? Why was the bully upset? Like it wasn't hit that hard. But at any rate, but this all builds to this kid's threshold to confront the bully, and his threshold for holding back and keeping his mouth shut and cowering, the fight or flight thing. Like at a certain point, he gets to the fight point, right? And that's the type of thing, yes, that Cronenberg is keen on. He's interested in exploring. That it's in all of us, right?
but that's the main darkness for me, is that in the first instance of bullying, he's very diplomatic. Like the son, kind of like, okay,
Yes.
you don't
Yeah.
threaten back the bully, you don't resort to violence, you just face him, you accept it, you actually own the insults he's throwing at you. He's like, yeah, you say I'm gay, you say I'm weak, and I'm that, I'm all that, and more. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, I guess, for whatever. It's kind of like that, and like, accept, like, it's a very diplomatic, mature way of reacting. But then once he sees the father commit an act of violence, it's just intoxicating and reinvigorating, and it almost justifies committing violence himself, which is what he does, where he beats the crap out of this bully when he attacks him later on, and it's dirty, it's mean, and you see that, he was nice up until that point, but he also harbors a lot of darkness in himself. And it was present throughout. It was always there. It was just keeping it hidden in a
Pushed
way, like you were
down.
saying. Pushing
Yeah.
it down,
Down.
yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I think too, there's even a comment in here that once you've exploded once and you can see yourself do it, then it's interesting. It's the son that shoots Ed Harris in this.
Yeah, that's one of the best
In
moments
the
in the
novel,
movie.
it's the wife,
It's the
right?
wife. Right. So like
Yeah.
there's this is a choice as well, right? Like why is it the son? Well, because the kid has gotten to that threshold, he's been pushed around so much and he's exploded once. Now he knows what he's capable of, right? So many little angles you can pick at this but that makes sense. And there's a little discussion in the fact that it's the kid, not the wife, who pulls the trigger.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting watching A History of Violence if you've seen all of Cronenberg's movies, because you can kind of see like little pieces of a lot of his movies in this movie. Like the transformation is very much like The Fly. The sex scenes are very much like Crash, but the dynamic with the son is very much like The Brood to me. It's very
Mm.
similar how like the instincts of the parents get passed down to the kids, like kind of biological storytelling, and it's kind of cool to see that highlighted just with what he does with the son. It's very interesting.
And
It's such a
this,
great moment too, that
Mm.
that shotgun blast, like if you see it in a movie theater, just seeing the crowd react to Ed Harris's just chest exploding. It's just like, oh,
it's
it's just
loud, it's
crazy.
sudden, it's shocking. It's a lot. It's a lot.
You also like expect Ed Harris to be around for the entire movie. Like I thought like, oh, he's just gonna be the villain for the whole movie. But like the fact that he gets killed with like 30 minutes left in the movie, it's like so unexpected. You're like, whoa, holy shit.
And so, like, now let's start to go towards like the conclusion of this. I do have to ask, how do you guys personally see the ending of this movie? Because the entire movie kind of leads up to, after the bloodbath, after this final act of violence, Joey goes to just wash himself clean to re-become Tom in a way. It's kind of like this symbolic act of washing away the blood, changing his clothes, and driving back to the family. And like you mentioned, Randy, it's kind of like this picture perfect meat and potatoes type of dinner. They are all kind of like still recovering from what happened before. They are glad to see him come back. They don't look necessarily happy. It's very tense. It's a very tense sequence, very tense atmosphere, but they don't reject him. They actually invite him to the table. No words are spoken. They just, the little girl takes the plate, puts it at his place, gets some meatballs, get some potatoes, and just, what's next? How do you guys see the ending for the film? How do you see it, Orrin?
Yeah, I think something that Cronenberg does a lot. It's like kind of his signature a little bit because we were talking about how he's the 90-minute master. Is that he usually ends a movie before like the resolution is about to happen. It's like it feels like there's like 10 or 15 minutes left in the movie, but he decides to end it on this note where it could just go in so many different directions. And the fact that there's no dialogue in the scene and you're just kind of like left to kind of imagine what the repercussions are is so fascinating because it's like, is he going to get arrested now? Is he going to be taken in? Are they like, hey, we solved this problem. We got rid of the past. Now let's just like, that was what needed to happen for us to still be a family unit, which is again, loaded with implications, right? Like, to maintain the homestead, we have to kill all these people. Are we just going to tacitly just understand that at this dinner table? Very American. But yeah, I just love that it's very evocative and you're just kind of left to just kind of sit with what happened, where they are now, and where they're going forward.
For me, so sort of right at the mansion, and after the sort of the bloodbath there, and he walks down to the lake and he throws the gun in the lake. I'm sort of stuck on the fact why he chose to clean up in the lake. Made no sense. Like why? Why wouldn't you just
Night
go use the
shower.
sink? It was really hard for me to get past that. Like that'd be so cold, and there'd be soap in the house. Like what is he doing? So that was a bit
Just
much
it
for me
looks
to get
cool,
past.
Randy. It looks cool.
So there,
It's
there was
it's a
that.
biblical reference, even though Cronenberg's an atheist.
It's like
Yeah.
the baptism in the waters in the river, but it's a lake near the house. They didn't have the
Yeah,
river in
yeah.
the location.
Yeah, come on. I think I've said enough to show that I'm not about thematics and symbols. So anyway, so then he goes back though, and I do like this moment. I think that Orrin's 100% right. It's evocative, right? This ending, but I think it's left open. In a way, it opens up sort of a thematic headspace for the audiences that that care. They can sort of have these conversations with themselves, with others, such as we're doing here. Like for me, I think that he walks in and what family eating together at supper time, meat and potatoes. Like there's nothing more, small town America and small town Canada, like than, meat and potatoes, family supper. Right. And in an old farmhouse. Like it just speaks so much to Americana and just sort of the history of the continent. And but underlying it is this act of violence that had to happen so the family can continue. And it's almost as if, okay, he's welcome back in the family, and just sort of somehow everyone knows that something not nice just happened, but dad is back because there's a chance he wasn't coming back. But now that he's back, things are okay, and we go forward from here. And that there's a history of violence there. So yeah, like to me, like it does speak volumes. And even though like he should have cleaned up with soap, there's that.
Beautifully put. I have to share what you just said, and I will say, like, the last thing I will say about this ending, to add on it, is that I really like. There's like one interview with this screenwriter Olson, John Olson, because we keep calling. Was it John Olson, right?
I think it's Josh.
Josh.
Yeah,
Josh Olson.
I follow him on Twitter. He's very left wing in a way that I personally like.
Okay,
so.
nice. Good to know.
Podcasters, like, and then totally separate to this, but as a coincidence, I just was going through Netflix and thought, trigger warning. That looks sort of interesting. I should watch that. And I watched the first 10 minutes of that. But that's his latest script. Like he's only got a handful of scripts, but trigger warning, which came out on Netflix last year. It's just sort of a cheesy action film starring Jessica Alba. And
okay. One of those.
I'm pretty sure that's him. Yeah.
Damn. Oscar nominated Josh Olson.
Yeah.
Writing the Jessica Alba Netflix action film. But no, I do like that in one of the interviews, basically, like the way he was talking about the ending is that people can see it however they want, but for him, it's very optimistic. There is that hope. And I do think the family dynamic is positive enough and adult enough, the way it's set up in the beginning, that they can overcome this struggle, internalizing that violence, that shared history of violence in that moment. But I like that literally the way he wrote the script, unintentionally so, but the last line of the script is "there's hope," the end, and it's literally one line on the final page. And he says, so it's up to you if you want to remove that page or not. Is there hope or isn't there hope? Up to you. Remove a page and it changes the ending, which is such a cool coincidence.
Yeah, to me, like, I always read that final scene as like not really being hopeful. I mean, like there is hope, because they're trying to maintain something, right? This family unit. But to me, like, at least I feel like this is on Cronenberg's line. It's Cronenberg's mind is that, like, at what cost, Like, we had to, like, Tom had to do all this horrible stuff to reclaim his identity and to protect his family. He killed, like, 15 people. And it's like, okay, now we can be a family. To me, it's like the opposite of the ending of The Searchers. And the ending of The Searchers, it's like, we killed all these Native Americans, we got the family back, hooray! And then John Wayne can't rejoin society. He walks away from the door, right? That iconic shot. Here, Tom Stahl rejoins society, or rejoins the family unit, and that is devastating unto itself, right? And so it's very interesting that Josh Olson has a more optimistic reading on it, because to me, it's more devastating.
You know what? I'm going to think about that for a long time, just the whole Searchers thing. Because Paul Schrader's like so many of his scripts like sort of launch off the back of the Searchers, right?
Same with Scorsese as a director.
So many of them. But is Tom Stahl, is A History of Violence the anti-Searchers?
There's an article waiting to happen. Right there.
I do think about that.
Feels like an essay that needs to happen.
Yeah, because like that's like what I was getting at with the Paul Verhoeven thing. It's like, what if you took a classic John Wayne Western, but you can kind of see the seams of it, and you can see the implications, and they're unearthed a bit more. And I love too, Randy, how you brought up David Lynch, because I also think like David Lynch, you feel it in like the mannered acting in this movie so much too. Like it almost feels like it's in a dream, or like this very idyllic version of America. So I don't know, that tone that Cronenberg walks, it's very intoxicating. I don't know.
It's very funny that Cronenberg himself actually mentions Lynch in the commentary for the film, where he says,
Oh, no way.
but because he said, I think it's like towards the opening, where he's like, yeah, you see the family. Is it a bit like what is it? It's not glorified, but kind of. It's like, when there's the family is having breakfast together. It's like, is it a bit too nice? Maybe, sure, but some of these families do exist. They just like spending time with each other. It's not outrageous. And then he talks about David Lynch, where he's like, David Lynch is very, I don't remember if he says like, not ironic, but something like that, where he says like, what you mentioned, Randy, like the beginning of Blue Velvet, it's like, oh, here's the city, but like, oh, right underneath, opening shot, it's like everything's dirty, and just like it's clear as day what's happening.
Right.
Well, the way Cronenberg develops the story, which is something that I do like when watching this movie with other people who don't know anything about the plot, which I think is the best way to go about it, is that up until there's that line where Tom is almost getting shot by the character Fogarty, Ed Harris.
Yeah.
He's like, I should have killed you back in Philly. It's like, up until that moment, it could easily be, kind of like classic Alfred Hitchcock, classic, he's just the wrong guy. They think he's someone else. It's like, no, he isn't. He's precisely that guy.
And there's
that's one of the best moments too. Just like that.
Such
dagger,
a well-acted scene.
I should have killed you back in Philly.
And
that's like
saying,
also
just
another.
The face.
Oh!
Yeah.
It just shifts. You see it in his eyes.
His face changes in a scene too. I think it's when he asks his son go in the house, and then the son goes behind him. They let the son go, like he's dropped the rifle, I think, at this point, and then he takes a couple steps forward, and you can see in his face he's different, right? And it's just such a well acted scene. And honestly, I always ever thought, because sometimes the Academy will do this, they will try to correct a wrong, and I think that there would be Academy members who said, you know what, shit, we should have nominated Viggo Mortensen last year, and that's probably a part of the Eastern Promises nomination. Is a little bit of, oh, we should have really, nominated him. The way that I think Gladiator was nominating Russell Crowe for that film, and maybe he won because he should have won the previous year for The Insider. So I think the Academy does that sometimes. Pardon me. And I think that's something that they wanted to correct, and it came back in Eastern Promises. Just a theory. Don't know.
I will say he's amazing in Eastern Promises,
and he is.
Though.
Yes.
And he is. But this is
really
the one
good.
that feels more like the Academy role, right? Because he's got the duality. It's right there. So it's just always a theory. But he's amazing, and honestly, you deserve an Oscar nomination for just being thrown around a Russian sauna naked.
Yes.
Yeah.
For 3 minutes,
with knives near the genitals.
That's Oscar stuff right there.
I do love that Cronenberg had such a good time making a history of violence that he basically did an inverted version of a history of violence with the Eastern Promises. It almost feels like two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. And I always think about those two movies together, even though I personally prefer A History of Violence because I just think it's more of a thematically rich text. I do love watching those two movies like almost as a double feature just because I think they weirdly inform each other a lot, especially in terms of how they explore identity, violence, sex, and all of that
as well.
stuff.
I think Eastern Promises, I always think it's very, not just for the naked sauna fight, but just in general, just the opening scene. I think both movies have like brilliant opening scenes, which have not really much to do with everything else, but just the hit in the barbershop, correct? That's the opening of Eastern Promises. It's just kind of like this gruesome image that sets up the entire movie, the entire tone. And yeah, on that note...
Yeah, definitely.
I think we all love... I would ask normally, like, which one do you prefer? The book or the film? But I think we're all on Team Cronenberg.
Graphic novel.
Yeah.
Oh,
I like the graphic novel more because I don't like themes. I just like gore, okay?
I like...
You like knives in mouths and things like that. But let's try to be positive a little bit. Is there a scene or a quote from the book that stands out to you? Do you have one written out, Orrin?
Yeah, I do. I wrote down the page number. Um, it's kind of like not an amazing scene, but it kind of stood out to me just because I didn't see this in the movie. But there's a
The
point. There's a
propane
point where,
tank.
yeah, not the propane tank, but there is a moment where like the mom is like, she says like, trouble is, how do you reassure a child the world's a safe place when you know full well it's not? And then it leads to this scene where the daughter is asking the mom a bunch of questions like, "Mommy, if Daddy died, would I have to go to an orphanage? Don't be silly, Day. He's not gonna die. What if more bad men come? They won't. If Daddy died, would I ever see him again? Ellie, stop it." I just thought that was like a really like endearing conversation. Just like this kid who is not really aware of the darkness of the world, trying to understand it, and the mom just trying to like stifle it. I thought it was a nice little scene. And then I guess otherwise, like I guess it was interesting seeing all of like the FBI investigation stuff, which Cronenberg decided to completely omit just because it's interesting to see like a different version of that movie that would have gone in that direction. But
Almost
I'd say those,
procedural, like, right?
yeah, more like of a David Fincher, maybe like
Mm.
police procedural. But but yeah, I'd say that that's what stood out to me in terms of something that was different in the graphic novel.
How about you, Randy? Do you have a favorite passage or moment from the book?
That's sort of a hard one. Like I'm sort of cool with this in its form that it is, but it is what it is at the same time. Um, I do sort of like the unshaven hippie in the woods, like the unshaven Forrest Gump guy selling Uzis. It's just sort of
With the
a,
guard
a
dogs
weird
keeping an eye on
Yeah,
the
moment,
yeah.
yeah.
people.
So that's sort of cool. I do like the opening chapter in particular, and I like the just the way that it's drawn and the exchange and the panels of the inciting incident, right? Like the violence in the diner, like just the way that's covered. So that sort of stands out as well. But yeah, the whole thing is just sort of fine. But I like what really is strong with the graphic novel is the hook. Like it is just it's a captivating idea, right? Like it's a form of the mistaken identity trope. So that's well handled in the opening chapter. But I would probably say, yeah, for fun, the unshaven Forrest Gump guy in the woods selling Uzis, and then but just in terms of like cool, it is sort of a cool sequence in the fight in the diner. That's what I'd pick from the graphic novel.
I was gonna say that's very much a Tarantino type character, but I think it's closer to Troy Duffy. It's like a Boondock Saints type thing. It's like I can picture that type of character, like Boondock Saints 3.
Yep.
Yeah, this was hard for me to choose, but one thing I do like, at least not so much narratively, but stylistically, is the way they portray the nightmares that he's having, kind of like this haunting memory of Richie that
Oh,
he
sure.
has, that Joey has, and it's just kind of like this face, kind of like appearing distorted in the wall behind this. Whether it's like the mist of nothingness when you're sleeping or the wall near his bed, but it's just a very creepy piece of imagery that just stood out to me on reread. Otherwise, yeah, there's very few things I would say are very not like my favorite in this graphic novel. Well, for the movie, I think that's maybe an easier thing. What's your favorite either quote or scene, Randy, from Cronenberg's version?
Yeah, again, I'll go with the diner scene for one. I'll point that out just because it's so fantastic, and it's dynamic in the compositions and the framing of Viggo Mortensen, just like he's reaching in one direction and looking back in the other. Like there's a dynamic energy to that, and as we talked about it, it's mostly through the edit and the compositions because the camera's not really moving much. So I'll definitely point to that scene, but I'll also point to the end, just when he's welcomed back into the family. Just thematically, it does leave the film on a thematic plane for people to consider. And like when you do consider that, okay, he's welcomed back into the family, and they can proceed as a family unit, but there's a history there. There's a darkness there. Daddy's back, but something bad had to happen for it to be there. So I think there are many, many moments like that. The film is littered with them, and it's why I really, really love this film. But to end the film with that type of an exclamation point, I'll just sort of use that symbolically as, what this film does well is the same type of thing that it ends out on.
Beautiful. What about you, Orrin?
Yeah, I have a scene and a quote. So for the scene, I feel like the most important scenes in this movie thematically for me are the two sex scenes that happen. Because the first sex scene, the wife is having sex with Tom Stahl. It's very romantic. It's very pervy. It's very sexual. It's very like it is like, this is the ideal couple right here. They are both in love with each other's bodies. It's very Cronenbergian in the best way possible. And then you have the second sex scene where Maria Bello is now having sex with Joey Cusack. And it's like, I think Manola Dargis from the New York Times described it as gangster sex. It's very rough. It's essentially a rape scene. And before the sex scene even happens, Tom Stahl like grabs Maria Bello by the throat and just rams her against the wall. And it's like, this is a completely different dynamic than what we saw before. So I just think those two sex scenes are so important to the film in terms of the before, the after, where we were then, where we are now. It's just so brilliantly done. You could arguably say that it's the best employment of sex scenes by Cronenberg, period. And how they work in the narrative and with the themes.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, it's great. And then for like the quote I wanted to bring up, there's a really great moment that happens when Tom Stahl meets up with one of the Richie's henchmen at a bar, and he's like looking for him, and it's like, hey, like, are you with Richie? And then he says, yeah, are you Joey? And in that moment, he goes from Tom Stahl, and he goes down to sit in the chair. And as that's happening, he turns into Joey and he goes like, yeah, I'm Joey.
Switching the accent.
Yeah, it's just such a subtle moment of transformation. It's like watching Jeff Goldblum turn into the Brundlefly just in like 15 seconds. It's so well acted. But yeah, those would be my two highlights. In a movie full of great scenes, by the way.
Honestly, for me, almost every scene, except maybe the son smoking the joint with the girlfriend. Almost every others. But even then has the sequence, as the little beat with the bullies who are about to go to him in the car, but then they're cut off the road by the two criminals from the opening. Where it's like...
Oh, that scene's so menacing.
Like, these two guys, they're bullies, but they're, okay-ish. That's real evil. Those are the bad people with capital B.
Right.
But for me, in terms of like, I totally agree with what you said about the sex scenes. I think especially the second one, what I love about it on rewatch, because I remember there was like a passage of time where I didn't rewatch the movie, and I did read some like reviews and things where some people were talking about like, oh, it's like a rape scene and it's uncomfortable. And I had forgotten how it played out, but then on rewatching it, it's like, yeah, there's a moment of like the slamming on the wall. She screams at him. She goes up the stairs. He stops her, but then he's like face to face to her, and he starts to kind of like lean backwards, but she's the one who kind of like takes his head and just kind of like kisses him passionately. Which is such a strong beat where it's like, no, she wants this now. Like it's not.
Yeah, like she's wrestling with her stuff too, right?
It's rough sex. It's just very rough. It's very different from what they did.
Painful
before.
Looking steps. I gotta say, they could have just gone upstairs.
Yeah, there's a moment that's kind of like they fall down, like the legs sticking out of the door frame. That frame, for some reason, of the entire movie, that's one of the frames that has stayed in my mind from when I was like 12 or 13. Just like the shot from the hall, just kind of like seeing the legs appearing.
Yeah. It is like kind of galaxy brain though, like thinking about David Cronenberg, because he's like, okay, like the violence itself, it's exhilarating, but it's disturbing. And he's like, what if I did that with the sex scene too? Maria Bello finds the sex disturbing yet exhilarating. It's like Cronenberg, how do you think of this shit? Like, you're
he
the
gets
only
it.
guy who would do that. It's crazy.
A good perv. But in terms of quotes, there was
Good
Everyone's
perv.
favorite perv.
Aaron's favorite perv. He just
Everyone's
gets
favorite
it.
perv.
That's why we
He just
love
gets
it.
it.
Yeah.
That's why we love him.
But my favorite quote, like rewatching it, I think it kind of like encapsulates so much of our conversation in the movie, is when Richie and Joey are talking, and Richie's like, the barbed wire, wasn't it? That's disgusting. You were always the crazy one. Joey replies, not anymore. And Richie says, yeah, I heard. You're living the American dream. You really bought into it, didn't you? You've been this
that's
other
a
guy
good
almost
line.
as long as you've been yourself. When you dream, are you still Joey? That's the movie in a nutshell. I would say
good
that's
one.
David Cronenberg in a nutshell. I think that's the moment, which is so funny because there's a
And
deleted
David Lynch in
scene.
a nutshell.
Oh, that's in a nutshell.
Yeah,
I love that
it's
that's-
hard not to talk about those two directors together.
Yeah.
To me, they're yin and yang, Cronenberg and Lynch, the
And-
two Davids.
I love that the screenwriter was like, I thought Cronenberg kind of like read the script and he liked the dream sequence in it, because there's a dream sequence that they also shot, which is called Scene 44. It's like on the featurette. And he was like, I thought he wanted to do the movie because this scene is kind of like the closest to what he did before, but it actually wasn't that. It was just the characters that really appealed to him and this sense of duality. And I think just the line, when you dream, are you still Joey, is like everything that Cronenberg has made since like Shivers and Rabbit onward. And
Yeah.
especially in this period where it's more overtly psychological, even psychosexual, if you want to go in that direction, where then he literally makes an adaptation where he has Freud and Jung and all those other people from 20th century psychology and psychotherapy. So what a film.
Yeah.
What a film.
Yeah,
What a guy.
We love him. I just want to bring up really quickly, based on what you were saying, Nick. Something that's always interesting about Cronenberg to me is I feel like the hype around him does not do justice to who he is as an artist, because it's funny that Josh Olson would say that about that Scene 44, because I think when people go into a Cronenberg film, they're like, oh, it's going to be really like gory, it's going to be body horror, it's going to be like pervy, it's going to be sexual. And it's like, yes, like that will be there, but it's amazing how the restraint that Cronenberg brings to his own projects, because he's very purposeful with how he employs sex and violence. It never feels like he's like trying to shove it in your face. It's like, this is just a part of the exploration that he's doing, you know? And I think that restraint is so underrated.
Yeah.
Totally. Beautifully put. On that note, this is the end of our episode, the end of our Cronenberg celebration.
Yeah.
I would say for people who've come this far who haven't read the graphic novel yet, I would say probably give it a shot, just more as a curiosity. I think it is worth it, especially if you like the film as much as we do, at least. It feels nice to be like, everyone's always talking of it being a comic book adaptation, but no one's actually ever read the comic book. It feels nice to have read it in a way, right? People like, I know what that's like. Don't think I'll ever want to read it ever again. Like twice in my life is more than enough. But so thank you both so much for joining me for this lovely conversation.
Thanks, Niccolo.
Where can our
Yeah, thanks,
listeners find you on the interwebs? Orrin, where are you? Where can they listen to you if you're still up for some podcasts, or where can they follow you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me at Bad Film Takes 1, but my handle, or like my name, is Nuanced Film Takes. Sometimes my
That's the
bullshit
twist.
trends. Yeah, that's the twist, right? It's like you think you're getting nuanced film takes, but you're actually getting bad film takes. Yeah, no, find me there on Twitter. I am staying there, even though Elon Musk is is a Nazi and he's doing his bullshit. I'm kind of staying there, weathering the storm. I just left gaming podcasting, but if you want to listen to the past 4.5 years of my video game podcast with Aaron McNair and Kevin McNair, the Jump Crouch podcast, we have like 100 episodes. I decided to retire to reclaim some of my personal life back, but yeah, find me there.
Amen. And I support that choice. It's one of the reasons why I stopped doing this podcast back in 2023. But also, it was hard to stay back. Just like Joey. Joey had to come out sooner or later, so did podcasting Nick have to come back. How about you, Randy? Where can the people find you and your writing and your voice?
Yeah. Well, you can find me and my buddy Jakob over at the Uncut Gems podcast, which is a weekly show where we talk about forgotten and misunderstood films. And you can track that down anywhere where you get your podcast. You can find what we do online at www.uncutgemspodcast.com. And what we've been doing so far this year, in January, we were talking about Peter Berg films. So that was fun. And each month we're doing a different director. So this month, February, we're talking about Antoine Fuqua. So those are great conversations.
What about in March, when this episode comes out of the podcast?
In March,
we'll be talking about.
Scanning my mind here. What are we doing in March? Andrew Davis films.
Who's Andrew Davis, actually? Wait.
Yeah, actually, I know Terrence Davies. I don't know.
Okay, Andrew Davis is the Fugitive, Code of Silence, Under Siege, a whole bunch of films, mostly Chicago. Whereabouts in the world are you, Orrin? Are you in the Midwest somewhere?
Yeah, I'm in Chicago.
Oh, there you go. So these will probably all be right in your backyard, the films we talk about.
Yeah, The Fugitive is a Chicago classic. I will say the ultimate Chicago film, in my opinion, is Michael Mann's Thief. But The Fugitive is pretty high up there, too.
Yeah, there you go. That would be one. So Chicago boy Andrew Davis, that's what we're doing in March. And we have a Patreon you can check out what we're doing over there. One of the things we're doing this year, we've started a Mike Nichols marathon. So
let's go.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So we have now gotten through his first 3 films. So that's fun stuff. So Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, The Graduate, and Catch-22. So go check those out. That's at www.patreon.com/uncutgemspod. And for my own stuff, you can check out the essays that I've been writing. I have a column, I Love Films, at Jakob's website, actually flashonfilm.com. So go check that out. And I'll leave it at that. I've got other stuff brewing, but I'll leave it at that. You can track
we'll save it for
somehow.
your next appearance. Hopefully there's
there we go. Yeah, I've got stuff brewing and updates, but I'll keep stuff under my hat for a little bit longer.
We'll let you cook.
Yeah,
you could cook.
Meanwhile, you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram at NikiGra97. On Letterboxd, just follow Nicolo Grasso. You'll find me very easily. While for the podcast, you can follow us on Instagram at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod, just to stay up to date for each new episode release. If you're following us on Spotify, Apple, be sure to follow us, and stay tuned for more episodes coming your way very soon. Thank you so much for listening to us. We hope you have a fabulous day. Goodbye.